Dr. Dark One's Scary Stories. Story 1. Okay, so this is probably the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm not some great writer or anything, but I just need to get this off my chest. A few months ago, my grandpa passed away. He lived in this old house he'd owned for decades, and since I was the only family nearby, it kind of fell on me to clean the place out. The house always had this creepy vibe, especially the basement. As a kid, I'd never go down there alone. It was damp, dark, and smelled like old wood and mildew. Anyway, I was sorting through all his stuff, finding the usual old tools, canned food from who knows when, and boxes of papers. That's when I noticed it. One of the shelves looked off. It wasn't flush against the wall like the others, and when I pushed it aside, I found this locked metal door. I had no idea the door even existed. It was old and rusted, and there was no key in sight. I probably should have just left it alone, but curiosity got the better of me. It took a bit, but I managed to pop the lock with a crowbar. The door creaked open, and honestly, I felt my stomach drop. Behind it was this room, perfectly preserved like a time capsule from the 1980s. I'm talking ugly patterned wallpaper, a boxy old TV, a couch that screamed "Grandma's house," and a coffee table covered in dust. It smelled stale, like no one had been in there for decades. At first, I thought it was kind of cool, but then I noticed the photos on the table. There were maybe 10 or 12 of them, all black and white Polaroids, and they all showed the same thing: the basement. The angles were weird, though, like someone had been sneaking around and taking these pictures without being noticed. The weirdest part? Each photo had someone different in it. Random people, all standing in the basement, staring blankly at the camera. No smiles, just blank expressions. I was already feeling creeped out when I saw the last photo. My blood went cold. It was me. In the photo, I was standing exactly where I was at that moment, in front of the door I'd just opened. Same clothes, same posture, everything. But my expression in the photo? I looked terrified, like I'd just seen something I couldn't understand. I couldn't breathe. I kept telling myself it was some weird prank or maybe a coincidence, but deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. That's when the TV turned on. It wasn't plugged in. The screen flickered with static, and I swear I heard this faint voice whispering my name. At that moment, every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but I was frozen. The lights overhead flickered, and then the room went pitch black. I don't know how long I stood there in the dark, gripping that crowbar like it could actually save me from whatever this was. When the lights came back on, the room looked different. The furniture was gone, the photos were gone, and the door I'd opened was now sealed shut like it had never been unlocked in the first place. But the scariest part? There was a single Polaroid on the floor, right at my feet. I picked it up, and my heart stopped. It was a photo of me again, but this time I was wide-eyed, surrounded by complete darkness, like I was trapped in some void. I bolted out of there and haven't been back since. The house is still there, and the thought of going down into that basement makes my skin crawl. I don't know what I found, but I feel like I barely made it out. Whatever's behind that door, I'm not opening it again. Story 2. Okay, so this happened about 2 weeks ago, and I'm still freaking out about it. I've told a couple of friends, but they don't believe me, and honestly, I don't blame them. If it hadn't happened to me, I'd think it was made up too. My neighbors are this older couple, super sweet, and they asked me to house sit for them while they were out of town for a week. It sounded easy. Just water the plants, bring in the mail, and feed their cat, Oliver. No big deal, right? The first couple of days were totally fine. Oliver is adorable, the house was clean, and I actually liked having a break from my apartment. Their house is way quieter than mine. No neighbors blasting music or random street noise. But on the third night, things got weird. I was lying on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard this faint sound. At first, I thought it was Oliver messing around in the kitchen, but when I checked, he was curled up on his cat tree, completely passed out. The sound was coming from the basement. It was this faint tapping, like someone was lightly drumming their fingers on the wall. I figured it was probably just the house settling or maybe pipes or something, so I ignored it and went back to the couch. But then I heard it again, louder this time, and then, I swear, I heard a giggle. I froze. It wasn't a playful kid's giggle. It was softer, almost muffled, like it was trying not to be heard. I told myself it had to be my imagination, or maybe something from outside, but it felt like it was coming from inside the house. I debated just leaving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left without checking, I'd never forgive myself. So, I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and headed toward the basement door. The house was dead silent except for my footsteps, and the closer I got to the basement, the colder it felt. I swear, by the time I reached the door, it was like standing in front of an open fridge. I opened it slowly, and the smell hit me first. This damp, musty smell that made my stomach turn. The basement light switch was at the top of the stairs, so I flipped it on, but only one bulb lit up, leaving most of the basement in shadows. My flashlight wasn't much better, but I could see enough to tell there was nothing obvious down there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. Nothing. I was about to turn around and go back upstairs when I noticed something in the far corner, a rocking horse. It was one of those old wooden ones, chipped paint and all, and it was moving. Not fast or anything, just this slow, rhythmic creaking, like someone had just gotten off it. That was it. I bolted upstairs, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it. My heart was racing, and I was trying to convince myself that maybe I'd bumped something, or the air had shifted, or, I don't know, anything to make sense of what I'd just seen. I decided to stay in the bathroom for a bit, partly because it felt safe and partly because I thought I might throw up. Oliver had followed me in and was sitting on the counter, staring at me like he was scared too. I splashed some water on my face and glanced up at the mirror, and that's when I saw them. Muddy footprints. They started near the bathroom door and stopped right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just me, Oliver, and the sound of my own breathing. I don't know how long I stayed in there, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, I grabbed my stuff and left. I texted the neighbors and told them I wasn't feeling well and couldn't finish house sitting. I didn't even care if they were mad. I just had to get out of there. They got back a few days later, and I haven't heard anything from them about the basement or the footprints. I don't think I want to. All I know is, whatever was down there, I'm never going back to find out. Story 3. Okay, so this is gonna sound fake as hell, but I swear it actually happened. My boyfriend and I just moved into this old duplex a couple months ago. The place was nothing fancy, but the rent was cheap, and that's all we cared about. The landlord, Mr. Gorman, seemed chill enough, except for one weird thing. The day we signed the lease, he gave us a little tour of the place and pointed out a door in the kitchen that led to the basement. He got super serious and said, "Whatever you do, don't open that door. The basement's off limits. Just stay away from it." At first, we thought he was just being one of those landlords who didn't want tenants snooping around his stuff. But the way he said it, it stuck with me. Like he wasn't mad, he was scared. Anyway, we didn't think much of it at first. Life got busy with unpacking and starting our new jobs. The door was just there, part of the scenery. But then weird stuff started happening. It was little things at first, strange noises, like shuffling or faint scratching, coming from the basement. We'd joke that maybe the place was haunted, but deep down, it freaked us out. My boyfriend said it was probably rats or something, but it didn't sound like rats. It sounded bigger. Then one night we were watching TV when we heard it again, this low, rumbling growl. It was so loud we both froze. It definitely wasn't rats. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. "Maybe we should call Mr. Gorman," I said, but my boyfriend shook his head. "He'll just brush it off. Let's check it out ourselves." I didn't want to, but I also didn't want to seem like a coward. So we grabbed a flashlight and headed to the kitchen. The closer we got to the door, the colder it felt. I'm not kidding. It was like walking into a freezer. When we stood in front of the door, I swear I could hear something breathing on the other side. My boyfriend reached for the knob, and I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I whispered. "He told us not to—" "Come on," he interrupted. "What's the worst that could happen?" I had a million answers to that question, but before I could say anything, he turned the knob and pulled the door open. The smell hit us first, this awful, sour stench that made me gag. My boyfriend shined the flashlight down the stairs, and that's when we saw it. Bones. I'm not talking about chicken bones or some dead raccoon. These were big bones, scattered all over the dirt floor. Some of them still had bits of meat on them, like they'd been chewed on. And then we saw the message. It was scrawled on the wall in what looked like dried blood. "Keep feeding it." "What the hell?" I whispered, but before my boyfriend could answer, we heard the growl again. This time, it was closer. The flashlight beam caught movement in the corner, a long, pale limb crawling out of the shadows. Then another. I couldn't move. My legs felt like jelly as this thing came into view. It was hunched over, with a twisted, bony body and glowing yellow eyes. Its mouth was full of teeth, way too many teeth, and they were all jagged, like broken glass. My boyfriend grabbed my hand and yanked me back toward the kitchen, but before we could make it to the door, it slammed shut. We spun around, and there was Mr. Gorman, standing there with this blank, almost sad look on his face. "I told you not to open it," he said quietly. "What the hell is going on?" my boyfriend shouted, but Mr. Gorman didn't answer. Instead, he locked the door from the outside. "You shouldn't have opened it," he said again, his voice shaking. Then he was gone. We pounded on the door, screaming for him to let us out, but it was no use. The growling behind us got louder. When I turned around, the thing was already crawling up the stairs. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of my boyfriend screaming and the feeling of claws dragging me down into the dark. If anyone finds this, please, don't open the door.